Welcome back. Apparently all is not lost when it comes to my rapid rating. Since I've switched to playing these games on chess.com on my own time rather than here on camera, I've won more games than I've lost. And the one I played last night, the game review says I did really well, as did my opponent. You can see here from the cap scores, we both played with over 90% accuracy. And down at the bottom, the ratings estimator estimated I played like a 1900 and my opponent played like an 1850. And you can see the little great symbol there for the opening, the middle game, and the end game. Now, according to the little chart up here at the top, I did have 2 mistakes and my opponent had 1 mistake. And the little graph shows that I had a very slight advantage as we transitioned into the end game, as high as plus 1.75. I'm going to switch over to the analysis tab and see if it agrees. I'm just going to go to the highest point there and then work out what happened. Okay, as usual, the analysis tab disagrees slightly with the graph from the game review. It says I had plus 0.98 here rather than 1.75, but it was my turn. I'm trying to remember what I played here without looking at the move list. I think what I did was check, but the problem with that might be that my rook is needed to guard this pawn from their rook. That once my rook gets out of the way, they can check me, and then wherever I go, they can win this pawn, and they're threatening that knight. So my guess is I probably shouldn't have checked here. I haven't looked, but the lines are probably on up there, aren't they? I'm guessing I should have left the rook here and I maybe moved the knight somewhere. I was keeping the knight there to keep their pawn from moving. Let's see, I can't move the knight here because their rook could just take it. It doesn't make a lot of sense to put my knight in front of their pawn, I don't think. Actually, that doesn't seem too bad. Knight to a5, because if they did come to attack it, I could always defend it with the b pawn and then defend that with the a pawn if I needed to. It looks like I also have a safe square for the knight here. I'm not too worried about what they can do to me. It does look like they can move their knight into e4, which threatens my rook, and then I would have to move it someplace. Okay, maybe I should have played f2 then. Sorry, f3. It's already on f2, isn't it? Okay, let's look at the lines that, yeah, they are on. Knight to d6. Okay, I'm not sure why that's so much better than anything else. Or rook to d5. Okay, I guess I can see that, although that allows what I said here, which if I moved, it says if I played rook to d5, they would play knight to e6. In fact, they would play that even if I put my knight on d6, they would play knight to e6. Well, I assume if I moved my rook here, they would do something with their knight because it would be hanging. Wait, once they move, if I put my rook there, once they moved it, couldn't I pick up this pawn? No, because I would want to keep my rook here. Or rook to d1. Oh, okay, I'm up a pawn right now, so it's saying I could go ahead and trade off the rooks. But if I went down, wouldn't they just check me then? It says that they would, and then I would bring my rook back. And then they would put their rook down here aiming for my knight. Okay, maybe that's why I need to play the knight here. But then they could challenge my knight there. Okay, but what I played, yes, I was correct in the move list. It says that was an inaccuracy to go down there. But according to the analysis tab and the game review's evaluation of that, it didn't take us down, and I still have a very slight advantage. I'm backing up just to see if the suggested moves are about the same. The evaluation is different now. It's dropped to 0.85. Okay, and now it's saying rook to d1 is my best move, and knight to d6 is my second best, but they're about the same. Okay, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have played this just because it would allow the check, and then I guess I would have to go back. And I don't know that I would have thought of knight to d6 because where is it going after that? Let's just play that out. Okay, we are back up to, no, it was 0.9 for a second, but now it's dropped to 0.7, back up to 0.88. Okay, now it's not saying that they would play the knight here. Now it's saying that they would play rook to c5. Okay, what does rook to c5 do? That's their best move? Or knight to e6 is close. King to f8 is also decent. Okay, I do see that the knight to d6 prevents the fork, not the fork, but the attack on the rook. I see that. Okay. So backing up, what does rook to d5 is my best move here? That also prevents this attack on my rook, and they wouldn't check me. I'm not sure. Why wouldn't they check me and pick up a pawn here? Because their knight's hanging. Okay, that's why. Okay, the reason that they wouldn't check me is because once I moved out of check, not only would their rook be hanging, but their knight would be hanging as well. And then they could pick up one or the other of those pawns at that point, but then their knight would be lost. Okay, so their best move here would be knight to e6. Okay, back the other way, knight to d6. It prevents the attack on my rook because my knight is guarding that square. Rook to c5 though, I don't get that. Why wouldn't they play rook to c4 to attack my knight? Because then my knight would move? To where? Oh, my knight's protected. Wow. Okay, well I clearly missed some nuances of this position here. that right now my knight is easily attacked. Right now this attack is imminent, and if I move my rook anywhere, I'm opening myself up to this. Putting the knight here protects it with the rook, while the rook is also protecting this pawn and my king from check, and that knight would guard e4. Okay, I get all that. But what I played instead was check, which is inaccurate. They had two possible moves. They're about the same evaluation, and they made this one to stay, I assume, to stay close to this pawn rather than going away from it, which would also take away a square from their knight. And after they moved out of check, my best move is b3. Because if I played b3, they could still check me and then pick up this pawn. It says they wouldn't. It says they would play f6. But what if I played b3? Wouldn't they check me, and why not? It says they wouldn't. It's not among their best moves. Okay, now it is. Well, it showed up for a second in the list. Okay, well, let's just say they checked me. I would still have a very slight advantage because I can still block with the rook. Okay. And then they would go down and challenge my knight, and I would move it to d6. But I would still have a very slight advantage. Okay. But instead, after they moved out of check, I played another inaccuracy. No, this was counted as a mistake, but the evaluation is still the same. I think it's obvious at this point that I was going for this pawn, and if they move it, my knight's going to take it. Stockfish says that their best move is to check, and that's what they did, but the game review counted that as inaccurate. Okay, so the game review is definitely struggling here to figure out what's going on, and my best move was to block with the rook. That should have been obvious, to protect the pawn, because that's my only advantage in this position is the fact that I have an extra pawn. I guess I was thinking that after I moved out of check and they took this pawn, then I would take this one and be protecting my other one. So I just moved out of check here. That was counted as a mistake, and it probably should have been because that took the evaluation down to 0. Okay, they took this pawn, and then I realized that I couldn't take this one and defend my other one because my knight's hanging, so I have to move the knight. I played the best move, and now their best move is to take that pawn. I have several moves that maintain equality here, including the rook taking their a pawn, which now is a passed pawn, and I have 2 pieces pointed at it. But I took with the knight instead, which give them a very slight advantage, I guess because they can check me. Stockfish is a beast. I just noticed this. Stockfish is saying that their second best move is to take on f2 with their rook, which looks bad at first, but if I take back, and I would take back, then they fork me and win my rook. And then they're up a pawn, and we each have a knight. But I might be able to force a draw at that point, I don't know. But instead, they brought their knight down this way, which I guess makes sense. But that brought us back to zeros according to the evaluation. I needed to play knight to c7. Not sure exactly what that would accomplish. Maybe aiming for a check down here on e8. But instead I played my third best move according to Stockfish, which leaves us very close to even. I attacked their rook, but of course they're going to take that pawn with their rook, which they did. Now I definitely need to... No, that's what I did play. I decided to force the rook trade at this point. I obviously didn't realize what Stockfish is saying during the game, but at this point, I thought that I could force a draw. I don't think at any point did I think I could win, but here I did realize I think I can force a draw. I thought if I went here, they would take my rook, I would take their rook, and their knight isn't positioned well at this point. It wouldn't be in a position to check me. It wouldn't be in a position to take this pawn. Their king is too far to attack this pawn, and I thought that my king and or my knight could get back over here soon enough. And I thought if I still had this one pawn here by the time they got one of their 2 pawns down there and we could trade those 2 off, my king is in front of their other pawn. And I know how to force a draw if there's just 2 kings and 1 enemy pawn and my king's in front of their pawn. I don't know if my opponent thought about that at this point, but I remember at this point thinking that that's probably what would happen. But Stockfish says I should have played rook to a6 at this point, and I'm not sure exactly why. It says that they would bring their rook back here offering the rook trade, but then I would jump up here to a5 aiming for that pawn, but then they would play rook to g6 aiming for this pawn, and then I would move my king over to protect that pawn. Stockfish's version seems a lot more complicated. What I did, as I said, was come down here. My opponent went for it, which is their best move, to take there. I take back, and then as I said, I was pretty sure they couldn't get to my pawn before my king could get back over there, and my knight, and or my knight. They were supposed to start bringing their king now up to the 6th rank, one of these 3 squares, or their 3 best moves, but instead they threw that pawn forward, and you saw Stockfish's evaluation drop to zeros. Not the game review one up at the top, but the 3 listed by the lines. They're all zeros, almost no matter what I play at this point. King to e3, coming toward my pawn. King to e2, coming toward my pawn. Knight to d5, I suppose aiming for this square. Well, I played knight to d3, which basically has the same idea. I'm protecting the f4 square. and Stockfish agrees that was just as good. Now here they did bring their king, and I brought my king, and you can see the zeros there in the suggested move list. They probably should have checked me here, but I just would have taken it, and then I would have had to hope that my knight could get over there to stop that pawn, or that my king could get over there in front of their h-pawn. But instead they brought their king again, which leaves us at zeros. I played one of my top 3 moves, which keeps us at zeros, which is offering the knight trade. One of their best moves is to take it, which they did, and of course I take back. And as I said, I was pretty sure several moves back that I could force the draw here. And at this point, their king can come forward, but then where's it gonna go? Because I'm gonna move my king over behind my pawn, and they're gonna have to move their king back, because my king would be cutting off those squares and my pawn would be cutting off those squares. So they would either have to do the pawn trade at that point or move their king back. But that's what Stockfish says, just play king to g4, and then I would play king to g2, and then they would do one of these pawn trade things. But h4 is one of the other moves they can play, which is what they played. Of course, I took it, they took back. Now here there's only one move in the list of suggested moves that forces the draw, and I found it. And this is what I've mentioned in several previous videos where I talk about I'm fairly confident in the end games. If I can come into an end game relatively even with my opponent, I'm not saying I'm an expert, but that's clear. But most of the time, because I have studied end games, if you go back and look at my videos from a year ago or 8 months ago, whenever it was, I've done a lot of practice on these positions. And I knew right here, they need their king to be in front of that pawn if they want to win. But they can't get their king in front of that pawn if I play here. And you see it lists that as a great move. Well, I don't know that it was great, but it was the only move. Now they have several moves that work, and they played one of them. And again, I have an only move. And again, this is because I studied the end games. Now, those end games that I studied didn't involve the king going backward to be by their pawn. It involved the king coming forward to try to get around their pawn. And I know that when the pawn and the king are advancing, but my king's in front, if I can't get directly in front of their pawn, I need to get directly in front of their king. And that is the only move that was counted as a great move. Again, they have multiple choices here because they have the pawn, and I'm not next to it where I can take it. So they can just go over here, they can go there, they can go here, they can go to any of those places, and it's still a draw. They checked. Now I have several choices, but getting in front of it is the best one. Now they can't bring their king forward. They have to put the king behind the pawn. Actually, as it says, they can do several different things because it's going to be a draw either way if I play precisely. But of course, they want to protect their pawn. So this is the only move that makes sense. That's what they do. And in this situation, I drop back. They bring their king. I get in front of it. That was counted as a great move because it was the only move. They check. I get in front of the pawn. We've been through this before. I don't know if my opponent knew that I could force the draw, because some of my opponents don't know that. They might have thought that they could have forced a queen promotion at this point. Or they might know that I could force the draw at this point, but they didn't know that I knew that, so they decided to keep playing, which is a good idea at this level. But anyway, I know to drop back. They bring their king. I get in front of the king. They go back. I come in front of the pawn. They go over. I have to drop back. Another great move. It said I had 10 great moves over there on the evaluation. They come forward, I get in front of the king, they check, I get in front of the pawn, and here they don't have any choice. They either move behind the pawn, in which case it's a stalemate, because I don't have any legal moves because of where their pieces are guarding, or they have to go somewhere else and then I take the pawn. It's a draw either way once they get their pawn to the second rank, and it was a draw. I was pretty proud of the way that that game ended. I'm just not really happy with what happened here, backing up one move. I am glad that the game review said it was closer. I mean, that the analysis board says that it's closer than the game review did. It's less than +1. So I didn't throw away a huge lead, which is what the graph made it look like. That's funny now. Knight to d6 is the 3rd best move. It was listed as the first, as the most bestest earlier. Rook to d1, rook to d5, or knight to d6. Onward and upward. Thank you for spending your time here. Hopefully you all are getting better at chess as well, and I'll see you next time.